My name is Lena Carter. I'm 38 years old and my daughter Mia is fighting for her life in the ICU. While I spent every waking moment praying for her to survive, my own family drained $927,000 from my account, every cent I had saved for her treatment. But the part that truly shattered my soul, the thing that made the air leave my lungs, was the text message from my own sister Claire. She wasn't asking if Mia was okay. She wasn't asking if I needed anything. She was demanding a family meeting to discuss financial matters. What they didn't know was that their greed had just reminded me of something I'd long forgotten: a locked drawer in my apartment, a drawer that held the one thing they never imagined I had. How did I go from a mother clinging to the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor to the woman who was about to unravel her entire family? It all started here, in the suffocating quiet of this room, where the only sound was the steady rhythmic beeping of the machine that was breathing for my daughter. The air in the ICU ward at Willow Creek Medical Center is cold and smells of antiseptic. It's a clean, sterile smell that I know I'll associate with fear for the rest of my life. I've been sitting in this hard plastic chair for what feels like an eternity, my body aching in places I didn't know could hurt. The room is kept dimly lit, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls that seem to move and breathe with the hum of the machinery. My world has shrunk to these four walls, to the pale, still face of my 8-year-old daughter, Mia, lying in that hospital bed. Her small hand is lost in mine, cool to the touch. My own hands won't stop trembling. I keep trying to still them as I gently adjust the thin, white blanket over her chest, tucking it in around her shoulders. It's a useless gesture, a mom reflex that has no place here amongst the tubes and wires, but it's the only thing I can do. I lean in close, my lips brushing against her hair, and whisper promises I'm not sure I can keep. "It's okay, sweetie. Mommy's here. Everything is going to be okay." The words feel like ash in my mouth. Every beep of the monitor beside her bed is a lifeline, a fragile thread connecting her to me. Beep, beep, beep. It's a constant metronomic rhythm that should be reassuring, but with every passing hour it feels more like a countdown. Every beep is a lifeline. But what if I can't hold on? My mind drifts, pulling me back to the endless nights, the double shifts, the holidays I worked without complaint. I think of every penny I scraped together, every luxury I denied myself, every single dollar funneled into a savings account that was supposed to be our fortress. It was for this, for a moment just like this, a catastrophic event that I prayed would never happen but prepared for anyway. The weight of that responsibility settles in my chest, a physical pressure that makes it hard to breathe. I built those walls to protect her, to ensure that no matter what life threw at us, we would have the resources to fight back. I see it all so clearly, the spreadsheets, the automatic transfers, the quiet satisfaction of watching that number grow. Our shield getting stronger. A nurse walks in, her shoes squeaking softly on the polished floor. She offers me a small, sad smile, the kind people give you when they don't know what to say. It's a glance full of sympathy, but it only makes me feel more alone, like I'm an exhibit in a museum of grief. She checks Mia's IV drip, makes a note on a chart, and leaves as quietly as she came. The door clicks shut, and the silence, punctuated only by the beeping, rushes back in, heavier than before. I'm isolated in this sterile bubble, with nothing but my thoughts and the terrifying reality of what's at stake. Just then, my phone buzzes on the small table beside me, the vibration unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I flinch. The screen lights up with a text from my sister, Claire. "Lena, we need to have a family meeting. Victor and I think it's important we all get on the same page about family assets. Let me know when you can break away." My thumb hovers over the screen. Break away? As if I'm on a coffee break. As if my daughter isn't hooked up to a machine that is literally keeping her alive. A hot surge of anger, sharp and blinding, cuts through the fog of my exhaustion. I don't reply. I can't. My focus has to be on Mia. But the message sits there, a glowing rectangle of casual cruelty. As I stare at it, a strange image surfaces in my mind, unbidden. It's a picture of the old writing desk in my apartment, specifically the bottom left drawer, the one that's been locked for years. I haven't thought about that drawer in ages. My father gave me the desk after my mother passed, and he told me to keep my most important things in it. At the time, I had nothing I considered that important, but now the image of it lingers, a faint and nagging whisper of something I've forgotten, a mystery I don't have the energy to solve. I dismiss the thought and silence my phone, pushing Claire, Victor, and their family assets out of my mind. Hours bleed into one another. Night settles outside the hospital window, turning the glass into a black mirror that reflects my own hollowed-out expression. I can't sleep. I can't read. I can only sit and watch and pray. In the dead of night, a desperate need for control, for some semblance of normalcy, washes over me. I need to see it. I need to see the number in my bank account, the solid proof that all my sacrifice meant something, that our fortress is still standing, ready for the war to come. With shaking fingers, I pick up my phone again and open the banking app. My heart thumps against my ribs as the little circle spins, loading. It feels like an eternity. I hold my breath. The screen flashes. The balance appears. My breath catches in my throat. I blink once, then twice, convinced my tired eyes are deceiving me. This has to be a mistake, a glitch in the system. But the number doesn't change. It sits there, stark and absolute. $0 checking, $0 savings, $0. The numbers mock me from the screen. The fortress is gone. The walls have been leveled. There is nothing left. It's all gone. What happened? What happened to the $927,000? The drive home from the hospital was a blur. I don't remember the traffic, the streetlights, or the turns I made. The entire world outside my car's windshield seemed muted, a distant gray film. My mind was stuck on a loop, replaying the image of that glowing screen, the two perfect zeros that had just erased a decade of my life. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand, heavy and lifeless. Back in my apartment, the silence was a different kind of suffocating. It wasn't the sterile, beeping quiet of the ICU. It was a heavy, dusty silence filled with the ghosts of my own hopes. I started pacing. From the small living room to the kitchenette and back again, the floorboards creaked under my feet with each frantic step. My apartment, usually a cozy refuge, now felt like a cage. A half-empty mug of cold tea sat on the coffee table. A stack of unopened mail was piled on the counter, and the city lights filtering through the blinds cast long, striped shadows across the floor like prison bars. This isn't real, I kept telling myself. It's a bank error, a system glitch. I'll call them and they'll fix it. They have to. The thought was a thin, flimsy shield against the tidal wave of panic clawing at my throat. My fingers fumbled as I dialed the bank's 24-hour hotline. The automated voice on the other end was cheerful and robotic, a cruel counterpoint to the frantic pounding of my own heart. After an agonizing series of security questions, a human finally came on the line. Her name was Brenda. Her voice was calm, measured, and utterly detached. I tried to keep my own voice steady, but it came out as a ragged whisper. I think there's been a mistake with my accounts. My savings, my checking, it's all gone. It shows a zero balance. There was a soft clicking of a keyboard on the other end. "One moment, ma'am." The silence stretched on, each second a fresh turn of a knife in my gut. "Okay, Miss Carter. I'm looking at your account history now," Brenda said, her tone unchanged. "I do see several large transfers made from your accounts over the last 48 hours. They were all authorized using your security information." "Authorized?" The word choked me. "No. That's impossible. I didn't authorize anything. I've been at the hospital with my daughter." "I understand this is upsetting, Miss Carter," she continued, with the practiced sympathy of someone reading from a script. "But from our end, the transfers are valid. The correct security protocols were followed." My throat felt tight and my vision started to swim. "But who? Where did the money go?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. For security reasons, I can't disclose recipient information over the phone." The finality in her voice was like a door slamming shut in my face. It wasn't a mistake. The money was gone, and the bank wasn't going to help me. Someone wanted me broke. The thought was no longer a shield. It was a cold, hard certainty. Just as I ended the call, my phone rang again. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Claire, my sister. I let it ring twice, my mind racing, before finally answering. "Lena?" Claire's voice was laced with a strained, artificial concern. "I saw you left the hospital. Is everything okay? Is Mia? The money's gone, Claire. I cut her off, my voice flat and cold. All of it. The $927,000 I saved for Mia. It's gone. There was a slight pause on the other end, a hesitation that spoke volumes. Oh, Lena, don't overreact, she said, her tone shifting from fake worry to something defensive, almost condescending. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. We can talk about this later. Right now there are other things to consider. Family needs. Family needs? I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The blood drained from my face, a cold dread washing over me. Her words weren't a comfort. They were a confirmation. She knew. She was part of it. The casual way she dismissed my life savings, the savings for her own niece's survival, felt like a physical blow. Before I could say another word, she made a flimsy excuse and hung up. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air. My mind flashed back to a memory from years ago, Claire and me as kids, sitting by the lake at the family manor, promising to always have each other's backs. The memory, once a source of comfort, now felt like a betrayal. Driven by a surge of furious energy, I went to my writing desk. That same desk with the locked drawer that had floated into my mind earlier. I wasn't ready to face that mystery yet. Instead, I tore through the other compartments, my hands shaking as I shuffled through old bills and papers, searching for something, anything, that could explain this nightmare. And then I found it. Tucked inside a folder with recent bank statements was a thin, folded piece of paper, a withdrawal receipt from a teller window dated 2 days ago. I hadn't even registered getting it. My eyes scanned the details. The amount was horrifying, a huge chunk of my savings. But it was the signature line at the bottom that made the world stop. It wasn't my signature. The handwriting was bold, sharp, and arrogant. It was a signature I knew as well as my own. Victor Hayes, my brother-in-law, my sister's husband. For a long moment, I just stared at it, the paper trembling in my hand. It was him. The vague family needs Claire mentioned, the cold dismissal, it all clicked into place. The shock began to recede, replaced by something else, a slow, burning rage that started deep in my gut and spread through my veins like ice. My gaze drifted from the signature to a small silver-framed photo on the corner of the desk. It was from a family gathering at Lakeside Manor last summer. The whole family was there, smiling for the camera. Victor had his arm around Claire, a proprietary smirk on his face. They looked so happy, so perfect. A pillar of the family. How could the man in that photo, the man married to my sister, do this? This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated theft, signed with a flourish. They drained my life savings while my daughter fought for hers, and my own sister's husband signed the receipt. Why? Why does Victor's name keep surfacing everywhere I look? The withdrawal receipt with Victor's signature felt like it was burning a hole in my desk. The rage that had been simmering inside me finally had a name and a face. I had to see him. I had to confront him. I left the apartment, the single-minded purpose overriding my exhaustion, and drove back to Willow Creek. I knew my family would be there, hovering like vultures under the guise of concern, and I knew that's where I would find him. As I drove, the image of his smug face in the family photograph morphed in my mind, pulling me into a memory I had tried to push away. It was last Thanksgiving, the first one after my father passed away. The whole family was gathered at Lakeside Manor. The air in the dining room was warm, filled with the rich scent of turkey and the sound of my aunts and uncles laughing too loudly after a few glasses of wine. But there was a tense undercurrent to the conversation, a discussion about the estate finances that my father had always handled with quiet competence. Victor had, of course, taken charge. I remember watching him from across the long mahogany table. He leaned back in my father's chair at the head of the table, a glass of red wine swirling in his hand. He wore a cashmere sweater and a look of supreme confidence as he explained financial jargon to the rest of the family, his tone patient and condescending, as if he were speaking to a room full of children. And then he'd smiled, that same smug, self-satisfied grin from the photograph. A grin that said, "I own this room. I own all of you." At the time, I dismissed it as arrogance. Now I saw it for what it was, the look of a predator surveying his territory. The memory dissolved as I pulled into the hospital parking garage. I couldn't go straight back up to Mia's room, not like this, not with this cold fire burning in my chest. I needed a minute to breathe, to gather the splintered pieces of myself before I faced him. I walked into the hospital cafeteria, a place of forced cheerfulness and quiet despair. The air was a chaotic mix of stale coffee, disinfectant, and greasy food. Trays clattered, conversations hummed into a low, indecipherable drone, and the fluorescent lights overhead cast a pale, sickly glow on everything. I slid into an empty booth in the corner, the vinyl cold and sticky against my skin. I just needed to sit, to think. What do I say? How do I even start? Don't yell. Don't cry. Don't give him the satisfaction. As if summoned by my rage, he appeared. Victor slid into the seat opposite me, moving with a fluid ease that made my entire body go rigid. He placed a cup of coffee on the table, though I knew it wasn't for me. He hadn't asked. "Lena," he said, his voice smooth and untroubled. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, perfectly at ease. "You look terrible. You need to get some rest." My hands were balled into fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. "I know it was you, Victor," I said, my voice low and shaking with the effort of keeping it level. "I know you took the money." He didn't even flinch. He just took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes glinting with amusement over the rim of the cup. He set it down with a soft click. "Tough times require tough choices, Lena," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of feigned wisdom. "The family has obligations. We all have to make sacrifices." "Sacrifices?" I could feel a hysterical laugh bubbling in my throat. "My daughter is upstairs fighting for her life, and you're talking to me about sacrifices? That was her money, her only safety net." "The family is the safety net," he countered, his smile never wavering. "We take care of our own. You should know that." He was twisting everything, using the very idea of family as a weapon against me. He wasn't denying it. He was justifying it, wrapping his theft in a cloak of noble responsibility. As he spoke, he gestured with his left hand, a casual, dismissive wave. A glint of gold caught the harsh fluorescent light. My eyes snapped to his wrist. The sounds of the cafeteria, the clatter of forks and the low hum of voices, all faded into a dull roar in my ears. The world narrowed to that single object. It was my father's watch, the Omega Seamaster with the dark blue face and the worn gold band, the one he was given for his 30th anniversary at his firm. I knew the tiny, almost invisible scratch near the clasp because I'd traced it with my finger 1,000 times as a child. It was supposed to be in a safe deposit box. I thought it was safe, but it was there, on his wrist, as if it belonged to him. The rage I felt about the money was nothing compared to this. This was a violation, a desecration of memory. This was him wearing my father's legacy like a trophy. My voice was barely a whisper. "Where did you get that?" He glanced down at his wrist, a flicker of feigned surprise in his eyes. "This? Claire gave it to me, a gift." He held it up, admiring it. "Your father had excellent taste." "That watch belongs to me," I managed to say, the words feeling thick and heavy in my mouth. "Dad left it for me." Victor finally dropped the pretense of concern. His smile turned sharp, cutting. "Relax, Lena," he said, leaning forward, his voice a low, condescending purr. "It's just a watch. Family comes first, right?" He stood up then, leaving his half-finished coffee on the table. He looked down at me, his expression one of pure, triumphant pity. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the cafeteria crowd, leaving me sitting there, frozen in the cold vinyl booth. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen a piece of my father, a piece of my past. He had paraded it in front of me and dared me to challenge him. If he was capable of this, of taking something so sacred without a flicker of remorse, what else had he taken? What else was he planning? How much further was he willing to go? I stumbled out of the hospital cafeteria, leaving Victor's ghost and the specter of my father's watch behind me. The world felt tilted on its axis. I was adrift in a sea of betrayal, with no land in sight. I didn't know where I was going. My feet just carried me through the sterile hospital corridors, past rooms filled with other people's private griefs. I felt utterly and completely alone. Just as I was about to step outside into the gray afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Lena, it's Sophie. We need to talk, alone. Meet me at the park behind the hospital. It's about Victor." Sophie. My cousin. My mind scrambled to place her. We had been inseparable as children, sharing secrets and summers at Lakeside Manor. But we hadn't spoken in almost 5 years, not since a bitter family argument where Victor had skillfully painted her as unstable and untrustworthy. I, like everyone else, had kept my distance, a pang of old guilt mixed with fresh suspicion. Why now? Why me? Every instinct screamed that it was a trap, another one of Victor's cruel games, but I had nothing left to lose. I found the park easily, a small, neglected patch of green tucked away behind the sprawling concrete of the hospital. It was deserted. The autumn air was cool and damp, carrying the faint smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. I sat on a cold, wrought-iron bench, the metal chilling me through my thin jacket. A few lonely leaves skittered across the pavement in the breeze, and the distant sound of city traffic was a low, constant hum. It was a secluded, forgotten place, the perfect spot for a secret. As I waited, I couldn't stop thinking about the last time I'd really looked at Sophie. It was at another family dinner, years ago. I remember Victor making a toast to family loyalty, his eyes fixed on her, and the way Sophie had shrunk in on herself, her face pale. I had looked away then. I hadn't defended her. The memory was a bitter pill to swallow. She arrived a few minutes later, looking just as haunted as I felt. Her coat was pulled tight around her, and her eyes, wide and nervous, darted around the park before they landed on me. She looked thinner than I remembered, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She approached my bench but didn't sit, just stood there, wringing her hands. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you text me, Sophie?" I asked, my own voice flat, devoid of warmth. I crossed my arms over my chest, a subconscious shield against whatever was coming next. She flinched at my tone. I couldn't stay quiet anymore, Lena. What he's doing to you, it's not right." Her words tumbled out in a nervous rush. "He's done things, said things, I heard him." Instead of trying to explain further, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small black USB flash drive. It looked insignificant, but she held it out to me like it was a bomb. "Just listen to this," she pleaded, her hand trembling. "Please." I hesitated, my mind screaming with distrust. Was this another one of Victor's manipulations? But the raw terror in Sophie's eyes felt real. I had my laptop in my shoulder bag. I carried it everywhere now, a mobile command center for a war I didn't know how to fight. I pulled it out, my movements stiff, and placed it on the bench between us. With clumsy fingers, I plugged in the drive. A single audio file appeared on the screen. I clicked play, and then I heard his voice, Victor's. It was lazy, arrogant, and thick with expensive whiskey. He was talking to someone, another man whose voice I didn't recognize, and he was laughing. It was easy pickings. Victor's voice slurred from the tiny laptop speakers. Honestly, almost too easy. She's so wrapped up in that sick kid of hers she wouldn't notice if the whole world was on fire. A few clicks, a signature here and there, and poof, the righteous, hard-working Lena Carter is broke. He let out a low chuckle. She handed me the rope to hang her with. My hand flew to my mouth, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. My vision tunneled. The park, the bench, Sophie, it all faded away. There was only that voice. His voice. It felt like he was inside my head, laughing at my pain, mocking my love for my daughter. It's like he's laughing at me from inside my own nightmare. I felt Sophie's eyes on me, but I couldn't look at her. I could only stare at the screen as the monster she had unleashed continued to speak. "And that's just the start," Victor boasted, his tone dripping with self-satisfaction. "The money is just the appetizer. The will is next." The audio file ended. The sudden silence was more deafening than his words. The will, my father's will, the one document that was supposed to protect my future, Mia's future. A cold, paralyzing fear, deeper than anything I had felt before, seized me. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even about the watch. This was about my entire existence. He wanted to erase me completely. I slowly lifted my head and finally looked at Sophie. She was pale, watching me with an expression of profound fear and pity. The evidence was irrefutable, but the question remained, hanging in the cold autumn air between us. Why? Why was she, the family outcast, the one to bring me this poison? What did Victor mean? The will is next. And after 5 years of silence, could I really trust the woman standing before me, whose own motives were a complete mystery? The question of whether I could trust my cousin Sophie was a luxury I couldn't afford. After she showed me the recording of Victor's monstrous confession, I knew I had two choices. I could retreat back into my grief and let him win, or I could take the lifeline she was offering, no matter how frayed it seemed. The woman who had stood before me in the park, trembling and terrified, was a far cry from the sister who had betrayed me. Her fear felt genuine, and her hatred of Victor felt as real as my own. I made my choice. I would trust her, for now. Sophie told me about her friend, Ethan Brooks, a former corporate lawyer who had burned out and now did freelance investigative work for people who, like me, had been chewed up and spat out by the system. She arranged a meeting. We were to meet him at a rundown diner on the outskirts of town, a place where no one from our family would ever be caught dead. The diner was exactly as I'd pictured. The neon sign outside flickered erratically, casting a sickly pink glow on the rain-slicked pavement. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fried onions. Sophie and I slid into a booth with cracked red vinyl seats that were sticky to the touch. A low murmur of conversation hummed under the buzz of the fluorescent lights. It was a place for secrets, a place for people with nowhere else to go. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. What am I doing here? I thought, wrapping my hands around a cold, greasy menu. Trusting my entire future to a disgraced lawyer in a place like this? Ethan Brooks arrived a few minutes later. He was not what I expected. He was tall and thin, with tired eyes and a slightly rumpled suit that had seen better days. But when he shook my hand, his grip was firm, and his gaze was sharp and intelligent. He slid into the booth opposite us and listened, without interruption, as I laid out the whole sordid story: the stolen money, Victor's taunts, the watch, the recording, and the horrifying mention of my father's will. As I spoke about Victor, about his charm and his cruelty, my mind drifted to a conversation I'd had with my father on the porch at Lakeside Manor, just a few months before he died. "Watch out for the charming ones, Lena," he'd said, looking out over the calm water. "The ones who make everyone feel at ease. Sometimes the prettier the flower, the deadlier the poison." At the time, I thought he was just being cynical. Now, his words felt like a prophecy. Ethan, with his weary eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, was the opposite of charming. And in that moment, I knew I could trust him. He didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Okay," he said, opening a beat-up laptop. "Let's see what we can find. I'll need your online banking credentials." A fresh wave of fear washed over me. Giving a stranger access to what little I had left felt like standing on a cliff edge. But I took a deep breath, pushed the fear down, and gave him the information. The next 20 minutes were some of the most tense of my life. The only sounds were the soft clicking of Ethan's keyboard and the distant clatter of plates from the diner's kitchen. Sophie and I just watched, our hands clasped tightly in our laps, as he navigated a labyrinth of digital firewalls and security protocols. Finally, he stopped typing. He let out a low whistle and turned the laptop screen toward me. "He's not just an amateur thief, Lena," he said, his voice tight with a grim sort of respect. "He's a professional." On the screen was a dizzying web of transactions. I watched in horror as Ethan showed me how Victor had funneled the $927,000 through a series of anonymous shell corporations, bouncing it from one to another in a matter of hours, making it nearly impossible to trace. The final destination was an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, registered under a holding company I'd never heard of. It was cold, calculated, and meticulously planned. "This isn't just theft," Ethan said, his sharp eyes meeting mine. "It's a pattern. This is a deliberate, long-term strategy to liquidate your assets and hide them where you'd never find them. He's been planning this for a very long time." The words hung in the air, heavy and sickening. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was a conspiracy. As the weight of that realization settled on me, a flicker of movement outside the large plate glass window caught my eye. I glanced up, my focus pulled from the screen to the dark, rainy night outside. For a split second, I saw him. A figure in a dark coat, standing just beyond the reach of the diner's neon glow, his face obscured by shadow. He was looking right at us. The moment our eyes met, he turned and melted back into the darkness. A jolt of pure ice shot through my veins. My breath caught in my throat. I must have made a sound because Ethan and Sophie both looked at me, then followed my terrified gaze to the now empty window. "What is it?" Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone was out there," I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Watching us." We were frozen in the booth, the damning evidence on the laptop screen suddenly forgotten. Our secret meeting wasn't secret. We were being followed. They knew. A new, terrifying question pushed all others aside. Who was that shadowy figure in the rain, and what did they know? After Ethan left the diner, his words echoed in the tense silence of my apartment. "We need something physical, Lena. Something undeniable." The recording from Sophie was a bombshell, but Victor could claim it was just drunken boasting. We needed more. I sat on my couch, the city lights a distant, indifferent glitter outside my window, and let my mind drift. I thought about my father. I thought about Lakeside Manor, the house he loved, the house Victor was now slowly consuming like a parasite. And then, Ethan's words triggered a memory, pulling it from the deep fog of my grief with sudden, startling clarity. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Dad and I were in his study at the manor, the room smelling of old books and leather. He was organizing papers at his big mahogany writing desk, the same desk that had flashed in my mind at the hospital. He'd called me over and tapped his finger on the bottom left drawer. It looked just like the others, but I knew it had a separate, older lock. "If anything ever happens to me, Lena," he'd said, his voice quiet but firm, his eyes serious. "The important things are in here, the real things. You remember that?" I had nodded, dismissing it as one of his morbid musings, never imagining a day would come when that memory would feel like a lifeline, a map left behind just for me. The memory jolted me into action. I had a key, a small brass skeleton key for that specific drawer, tucked away with other old keepsakes. And I had the key to the manor's back door, one my father had insisted I keep just in case. This was it. This was the physical proof Ethan was talking about. I had to go. The drive to Lakeside Manor that night was the longest of my life. The further I got from the city, the darker the roads became, winding through dense patches of forest that swallowed my headlights. When the manor finally came into view, it was an imposing silhouette against a sliver of moon, its windows dark and vacant, like empty eyes. I parked my car down the road out of sight and made my way onto the property on foot, my heart pounding with every crunch of gravel and snap of a twig under my shoes. The air was cold and still. All I could hear was the frantic thumping in my ears and the distant hoot of an owl. The spare key slid into the lock of the back door with a soft click. My hand was trembling so much it took 2 tries to turn it. The door swung inward with a low groan, opening into the cavernous, dark kitchen. The house was dead silent. The air was thick with the familiar smell of lemon furniture polish and old wood, but underneath it, I could detect something else, the faint, cloying scent of Victor's expensive cologne. It was as if his presence lingered in the very air, and the feeling that I was not alone in the house made the hair on my arms stand up. Moving like a ghost, I crept through the darkened hallways, my phone's dim screen the only light guiding my way. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. Finally, I reached the study. I pushed the heavy oak door open and slipped inside, closing it gently behind me. Moonlight streamed through the tall, mullioned windows, illuminating the room in ethereal stripes of silver and black. Dust motes danced in the pale beams, and there it was, the mahogany desk, standing like a silent, sleeping giant in the center of the room. I knelt before it, my breath held tight in my chest. My fingers traced the outline of the bottom left drawer, the one from my father's memory. And then I saw it. My heart plummeted. The dark wood around the small brass lock was splintered. There were fresh, deep scratches in the varnish, gouges that were stark and white against the dark stain. Someone had already been here. Someone had forced it open. A wave of nausea washed over me. I was too late. With a sense of sickening dread, I pulled the damaged drawer open. It slid out with a rough, grating sound. Inside, papers were tossed about in disarray, but tucked beneath a stack of old tax returns was a thick, cream-colored vellum envelope. My name wasn't on it. My father's was. With shaking hands, I lifted it out and opened the flap. I pulled out the document inside, my phone's flashlight beam trembling as I held it over the pages. The title at the top made my blood run cold. Last Will and Testament of Richard Carter. I scanned the pages, my eyes flying across the dense legal text. My mind struggled to process the words. Page after page, it laid out the distribution of my father's assets. And on the final operative page, the truth hit me like a physical blow. The will named Victor Hayes as the sole heir to the entire estate, including Lakeside Manor and all financial assets. My sister Claire was named as the secondary beneficiary. I was mentioned only once, in a single dismissive clause, bequeathing me a token sum that was an insult. It was a complete and total erasure. My shaking light found the signature page. I knew my father's signature. I knew its confident loops, the sharp, decisive cross of the T. This was close. It was a masterful imitation, but it was wrong. The pressure was too uniform, the curves too perfect, too practiced. It lacked the life, the familiar, impatient flourish of his real signature. It was a forgery, a cold, dead copy. Dad would never do this, I thought, a wave of certainty cutting through my shock. Never. The thought that someone might have forced him flickered for a second, but I pushed it away. This wasn't force. This was fraud. This was Victor's handiwork. I sat there on the cold, hard floor of my father's study, the forged will clutched in my hand, the silent, empty house pressing in on me. He hadn't just stolen my savings. He had stolen my home, my past, and my future. He had rewritten my father's last wishes to cut me out of existence. Is this document legally binding? Who else knows about this? And if Victor was bold enough to forge a will, what on earth was he planning to do next? Walking into Lakeside Manor for the family dinner felt like willingly stepping into the lion's den. After finding the forged will, I had called Ethan and Sophie, my voice a low, trembling whisper as I described the fraudulent document. Ethan's advice was chillingly calm. Go to the dinner, Lena. Don't accuse. Don't react. Watch them. An animal is most dangerous when it thinks it's cornered. Right now, Victor thinks he's the king of the jungle. Let him. So I went. I put on a brave face, a mask of weary composure, and drove back to the house that should have been partly mine. The manor was ablaze with light, a stark contrast to the darkness I had crept through just nights before. Cars lined the gravel driveway, gleaming and expensive. Inside, the oppressive opulence was a physical assault. The dining room was set for a banquet with gleaming crystal glasses, heavy silver cutlery, and a centerpiece of flowers that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. The rich aroma of roast beef and garlic hung in the air. The whole scene was a grotesque parody of the happy family dinners I remembered. My mind flashed back to my father's 60th birthday in this very room. The air had been filled with genuine laughter then, the clinking of glasses a sound of celebration, not a prelude to war. Now the room was a stage, and we were all actors in Victor's twisted play. He greeted me at the door, a wide, predatory smile stretching across his face. "Lena, so glad you could make it," he boomed, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "We were worried about you." "You weren't worried. You were wondering if I'd figured it out yet," I thought, my hand clenching into a fist at my side. I forced a tight, brittle smile. I wouldn't miss it. My sister Claire was hovering near the table, fussing with already perfect napkins. She glanced at me for a split second, her eyes wide with something I couldn't decipher. Guilt, maybe, or fear, before looking away, her shoulders tensed. She didn't say a word to me. The rest of the family offered mumbled, awkward greetings, their eyes unable to meet mine for more than a moment. They knew. At some level, they all had to know. They were cowards, content to feast on the spoils of a quiet coup. The dinner was an exercise in torture. The clatter of silverware on expensive china was deafening in the strained silence. I moved the food around on my plate, the taste of betrayal turning everything to ash in my mouth. I could feel Victor's eyes on me from his throne at the head of the table. He was enjoying this, savoring my discomfort. Halfway through the main course, he cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention. "I have some good news," he announced, beaming. "Claire and I finally picked up the new car. A real beauty." He went on to describe a top-of-the-line German sports car, boasting about its horsepower and absurd price tag, with a relish that made my stomach turn. He was flaunting it. He was flaunting my daughter's money right in my face. Then he turned his gaze directly to me, his smile widening. "Enjoying the meal, Lena?" he asked, his voice carrying across the table. "Don't worry, it's all on family funds. We have to invest in keeping everyone happy after all." The entire table went silent. Everyone stared at me, waiting for the explosion. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, a hot tide of humiliation and fury. My hand tightened around my water glass, my knuckles white. I wanted to hurl it at his smug face, to scream, to expose him right there and then, but Ethan's voice echoed in my head. "Watch them." I took a slow, deliberate breath, my gaze locking with Victor's. I gave him nothing. Not a tear, not a flicker of anger, just a cold, empty stare that seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. Under the table, I felt a gentle tap on my shoe. It was Sophie. She was seated a few chairs away, her face a pale, anxious mask. It was our prearranged signal. My heart started to pound a new, adrenalized rhythm. This was it. While Victor was focused on my reaction, I discreetly reached into the pocket of my jacket. My fingers closed around a tiny, folded piece of paper. With painstaking slowness, I slipped my hand under the heavy linen tablecloth. I felt Sophie's hand meet mine in the darkness, her fingers cool and trembling as she took the note from me. It held a single sentence. "Ethan says the study camera goes in tomorrow night." It was a tiny act of rebellion, a secret exchange in the heart of enemy territory. For the first time all night, I felt a flicker of power. We were fighting back. As my hand retreated, I risked a glance up at Victor. His smile was gone. His eyes had narrowed into suspicious slits, his gaze fixed on the space between Sophie and me. He hadn't seen the note, I was sure of it, but he'd seen something, a flicker of movement, a shared glance, the subtle shift in the air that signals a secret alliance. The hunter's instinct behind his eyes told me he knew something was wrong. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of this new, sharper tension. I could feel his gaze on us, analytical and dangerous. The game had changed. He wasn't just taunting me anymore. He was watching me. He was watching us. What would he do now that his suspicions were aroused? The drive home from Lakeside Manor was thick with a new kind of dread. Victor's suspicious gaze felt like it was physically branded onto the back of my neck. He knew. He didn't know what, not yet, but he knew something was amiss. The small victory of passing the note to Sophie had evaporated, replaced by the chilling certainty that I had tipped my hand. The hunter was now aware that the prey was fighting back. Back in my apartment, I paced the floor, the tension from the dinner clinging to me like a shroud. The plan to plant the camera in his study tomorrow night, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a suicide mission. It was late. The city outside my window had quieted to a distant hum, punctuated by the occasional wail of a far-off siren. I had a single lamp on, casting a small, lonely pool of light in the darkened living room. I sat on the edge of my couch, my body thrumming with a nervous energy that wouldn't let me rest. Every creak of the old building, every rattle of the pipes made me jump. He's going to do something, I thought, my mind racing. He won't just let this go. He's going to make a move. The feeling of being watched hadn't left me. It had followed me home. A sharp, hesitant knock on my door made my heart leap into my throat. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. It was almost midnight. No one came to my apartment this late. My first thought was him, Victor. Had he followed me? Had he come to threaten me? To finish what he started? I crept toward the door, my bare feet silent on the cool wood floor. My hand was shaking as I reached for the peephole. I peered through the small, distorted lens and my breath caught. It wasn't Victor. It was Claire. She was standing alone in the dim hallway, her shoulders slumped, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked nothing like the poised, put-together woman from the dinner party. This was someone I hadn't seen in years. This was someone broken. I hesitated for a long moment, my hand hovering over the lock. My anger warred with a flicker of something else, something I couldn't name. Reluctantly, I unlatched the door. She slipped inside without a word and just stood there in the entryway, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her gaze was fixed on the floor, her hands twisting the leather strap of her bag over and over. "What do you want, Claire?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. That's when the dam broke. A shuddering sob escaped her lips. "I knew, Lena," she whispered, the words fractured by tears. "I knew he was taking the money. I didn't know how much. I swear I didn't, but I knew, and I didn't stop him." She finally looked at me, her face a mask of desperation and self-loathing. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She stumbled forward and collapsed into the armchair near the door, her body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. I just stood there watching her, a wall of ice around my heart. Sorry wasn't going to bring back the money. Sorry wasn't going to help Mia. As she cried, my mind flashed back to a memory from so long ago I'd almost forgotten it. I was 7, and a boy on the playground had pushed me down, scraping my knee. Claire, who was only 9, had launched herself at him like a tiny, furious tornado, all flailing fists and righteous indignation, until he ran away. She had helped me up, wiped my tears, and walked me home, her small hand holding mine protectively. Where was that girl? Where was the sister who would have fought for me? "You watched him do it," I said, my voice quiet but sharp with the edge of my pain. "You sat at that table tonight and watched him mock me. You said nothing." "I couldn't," she cried, shaking her head. "You don't understand. I was scared." "Scared of what?" I shot back. "Losing the new car? Losing the house?" "No!" she cried out, lifting a hand to wipe the tears from her face. As she did, the sleeve of her silk blouse slid down her arm just an inch. Under the dim, focused light of the single lamp, I saw it. A dark, ugly bruise circled her wrist, a sickening constellation of purple and blue against her pale skin, shaped distinctly like a grasping hand. I stopped breathing. The angry words died in my throat. The sounds of the room, her sobbing, my own heartbeat, it all faded away. There was only that mark. It was stark. It was violent. It told a story that had nothing to do with money or family assets. In that instant, the entire narrative of the past few weeks shifted, tilting into a much darker, more terrifying place. Claire saw where I was looking. A flash of pure shame and fear crossed her face. She quickly yanked her sleeve down, hiding the evidence, but it was too late. I had seen it. The gesture was more damning than the bruise itself. I stood there frozen, looking at this woman who was my sister, the accomplice, the betrayer. And now, something else entirely. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my chest, but it was now tangled with a cold, horrifying pity. My mind reeled. Can I trust her after everything? The question felt too simple now, hopelessly naive. The real question was so much more complicated. Is this broken, bruised woman in my living room just another one of Victor's victims? Or is this, too, somehow part of his twisted, manipulative game? Claire left my apartment as abruptly as she had arrived, leaving behind a storm of confusion and the ghost of a bruise on my wrist. The image was seared into my mind. Was it a plea for help, or a masterfully played card in Victor's game? The next morning, I was on the phone with Ethan, the weight of that question heavy in my voice as I recounted the strange, desperate visit. In her tearful confession, Claire had let something slip, a crucial piece of information. Victor had a standing private meeting every Tuesday night, away from the office, leaving his personal study at the manor completely empty for hours. "It's a window, Lena," Ethan said, his voice a low hum of strategic calm on the other end of the line. "It's our only shot to get the camera in his office there, but you have to make the call. Is her information good?" I hesitated, my fingers twisting in the phone cord. Could I risk our entire plan on the word of a woman who had stood by and watched my life burn? My mind flashed back to a distant memory, Claire and I as teenagers, huddled together in my bedroom, cramming for a final exam. She had patiently explained a complex math problem to me over and over, refusing to give up until I understood. "We're a team," she had whispered then, her head bent next to mine under the glow of my desk lamp. "We get through it together." The memory was a dull ache, a reminder of a time when trusting her was as natural as breathing. Now, trusting her felt like the most dangerous gamble in the world. "Yes," I said finally, the word coming out with more confidence than I felt. "The information is good. Let's do it." I was taking the leap, betting everything on the faint hope that the sister I once knew was still in there somewhere, suffocating under Victor's control. That Tuesday, while Ethan, armed with Claire's information, prepared to breach the lion's den, I went to the one place that mattered. I went to the hospital. I sat in the quiet, sterile room, holding Mia's small, warm hand in mine. For weeks, the steady beeping of the heart monitor had been a sound of terror, a countdown to the unknown. But today, something was different. The rhythm felt stronger, more assured. I watched her, really watched her, and I saw it. A faint touch of pink had returned to her cheeks, chasing away the pale, translucent quality her skin had held for so long. As I watched, her fingers, limp in my hand for days, gave a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch. My breath caught in my throat. It was the smallest of signs, a flicker of life so subtle anyone else would have missed it. But for me, it was a seismic shift. It was hope. A fierce, protective wave of determination washed over me, so powerful it left me lightheaded. This fight wasn't just about getting back what was stolen anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about her. It was about fighting for every one of those fragile heartbeats, for the future I could now see returning to her face. My resolve, which had been forged in anger, was now hardened by love. Later that night, I was huddled with Ethan and Sophie in his small, cluttered office space that smelled of old coffee and electronics. The air was thick with tension. On his laptop screen was a live feed from a tiny camera, now hidden in a book on the shelf of Victor's study at the manor. The image was crisp, showing the opulent, empty room. The silence stretched on. We watched the clock on the screen tick past 10, then 10:30. Doubt began to creep in, cold and sharp. What if Claire had set me up? What if Victor was on his way here right now? And then, the door on the screen opened. Victor walked in. He looked tired but satisfied. He loosened his tie and sat down at his massive desk, pulling a stack of documents from his briefcase. For several long minutes, he just reviewed them. Then he opened a desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a different pen, and a blotter. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. We watched in rapt silence as he spread the new document out. He meticulously practiced a signature on a scrap piece of paper, his movements precise and unhurried. Then, with the intense concentration of an artist, he bent over the official document and slowly, carefully, forged a signature at the bottom. He held it up to the desk lamp, a small, self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips as he admired his handiwork. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated criminality, captured in crystal-clear high definition. "We've got him now," Ethan whispered, his voice tight with triumph. "We've got him cold." A wave of relief and cold fury washed over me. Sophie let out a shaky breath beside me. The final, undeniable piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. Looking at the screen, at the man who had so casually tried to erase me, I felt a new sense of clarity. The time for hiding, for observing, was over. "I'm calling a family meeting," I said, my voice steady and clear, surprising even myself with its strength. "At Lakeside Manor. All of them. It's time to end this." I stared at the frozen image of Victor on the screen, the evidence of his treachery held proudly in his hand. The proof felt like a weapon, heavy and dangerous. But as I prepared for the final confrontation, a sliver of fear remained. We had him on camera. We had the forged will. But was it enough? Would this be enough to tear down the empire of lies and fear that he had so carefully built around my family? I called the family meeting under the guise of wanting to clear the air and heal the family. Victor, I'm sure, saw it as his final victory lap, a chance to watch me formally surrender. The rest of them likely came out of a morbid sense of curiosity, eager to witness the final act of my humiliation. They had no idea they were walking into a trial, and that I was no longer the victim. I was the prosecutor. I arrived at Lakeside Manor to find them all gathered in the grand living room, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. They were scattered awkwardly on the plush velvet sofas and leather armchairs, a strained and uncomfortable silence hanging in the air. A fire crackled in the enormous stone fireplace, casting flickering shadows on their faces. At the center of it all, of course, was Victor. He was standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking relaxed, powerful, and utterly in control. He gave me a slow, condescending smile as I walked in. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest, but my hands were steady. I took my place in a single armchair I had deliberately positioned to face them all, a small island in a sea of hostility. I let the silence stretch for a moment, meeting the eyes of each aunt, uncle, and cousin. Most of them looked away. Claire, seated next to Victor, stared intently at her own hands, twisting a ring on her finger. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice calm and even, resonating in the quiet room. Claire was right. It's time we talked about family matters, specifically about my savings account and about Dad's will. Victor let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Lena, are we really back to this? We've all been worried about you, but this obsession is unhealthy. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly." I ignored him. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the large oak coffee table in the center of the room. "Before you dismiss me again, I'd like you all to hear something." I pressed play. Victor's own voice, lazy and smug, filled the living room. It was easy pickings. She's so wrapped up in that sick kid of hers she wouldn't notice if the whole world was on fire. The righteous, hard-working Lena Carter is broke. A collective gasp went through the room. My Aunt Clara's hand flew to her chest. My Uncle Robert, who had always championed Victor, stared at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. Claire went as white as a sheet, her entire body seeming to shrink into the sofa cushions. Victor's face hardened, the charming smile freezing and then cracking at the edges, but he quickly recovered. "Drunken nonsense," he spat, waving a dismissive hand. "Meaningless words recorded out of context. You're more manipulative than I thought, Lena, trying to turn the family against me with this garbage." He started to stand up, ready to command the room back under his control. "This ends now, Victor," I said, my voice cutting through his bluster like a shard of ice. I raised a small remote and pointed it at the large smart TV mounted over the fireplace. The screen, which had been displaying a peaceful landscape, flickered to life. And there it was, the crisp, clear footage from the hidden camera. The screen showed Victor, in this very house, in his private study. It showed him meticulously, painstakingly, forging my father's signature on a document. The entire room was silent except for the crackling of the fire. No one moved, no one breathed. They watched as the Victor on the screen held the forged document up to the light, a small, triumphant smirk on his face. The Victor in the room was a different story. His confident posture crumbled, the color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. The whiskey glass slipped from his fingers, hitting the thick Persian rug with a dull thud. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was trapped. He was exposed. And it was all there on a 60-inch screen for everyone to see. The room erupted. It was chaos. Shouts and accusations flew from all corners. "How could you?" my aunt shrieked, tears streaming down her face. My uncle was on his feet, his face purple with rage, yelling at a sputtering, incoherent Victor. In the midst of the maelstrom, my mind was strangely calm. I thought of Mia, of the faint touch of color in her cheeks, of the tiny twitch of her fingers. "This is for you, baby," I thought. "This is for us." And then another sound cut through the chaos. It started faint and distant, a high-pitched wail from far down the long country road leading to the manor, but it grew louder and louder, a piercing, undeniable scream that was getting closer with every second. Police sirens. Everyone froze. The shouting died in their throats. Every head turned toward the massive front windows. Red and blue lights began to pulse in the darkness, sweeping across the living room walls, bathing their horrified, shocked faces in frantic, flashing colors. The fire still crackled. The grandfather clock in the hall still ticked. But everything had changed. My own heart gave a jolt of surprise. This wasn't my plan. This wasn't Ethan's plan. Our strategy was to use the evidence to force Victor's hand legally, to dismantle his empire piece by piece. This public, dramatic arrival, this was something else. This was someone else's move. Who called the police? The approaching sirens grew from a distant wail into an all-consuming scream, and the living room at Lakeside Manor was painted in frantic, pulsing strokes of red and blue. The family stood frozen, a tableau of shock and horror. Victor's face, which had been pale with exposure, was now mottled with disbelief and fury. He shot a venomous glare at me, his eyes promising retribution. But before he could speak, the great oak front door burst open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, their presence instantly sucking all the chaotic energy out of the room, replacing it with a cold, official gravity. Their movements were calm, deliberate, and absolute. The shouting and crying died into a stunned, breathless silence. One of the officers, a tall man with a grim, set jaw, scanned the room, his eyes landing on Victor. "Victor Hayes?" The officer's voice was a deep, no-nonsense baritone that cut through the silence. Victor straightened up, attempting to summon the last vestiges of his arrogant authority. "Yes? There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding, officer. This is a private family matter." "Sir, you are under arrest for multiple counts of fraud and forgery," the officer stated flatly, stepping toward him. "Please put your hands behind your back." Panic finally shattered Victor's composure. "This is ridiculous. It's her," he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's the one who's unstable. She's been harassing my family for weeks." The officers ignored his sputtering protests. They closed the distance, and with swift, practiced efficiency, they had his hands cuffed behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of an empire falling. It was the sound of my first breath of clean air after weeks of drowning. As they led him away, his face contorted with impotent rage, he locked eyes with me one last time. "You'll regret this, Lena," he screamed, his voice raw. "This isn't over." Then he was gone, pulled out into the flashing lights of the night, leaving a profound and ringing silence in his wake. The room seemed to exhale all at once. The spell was broken. Without Victor at the center, holding them all in his orbit of fear and greed, the family seemed to collapse. My aunts and uncles, looking old and ashamed, began to filter out of the room one by one, muttering hushed apologies to no one in particular, unable to look me in the eye. They left until only 2 people remained in the vast, empty room, me and my sister. In the quiet aftermath, with only the crackling fire for sound, Claire slowly walked toward me. Her face was a ruin, etched with tears and a bone-deep weariness. My own anger, which had been a shield for so long, felt heavy and useless now. As she stood before me, my mind flashed back to the dark bruise I had seen on her wrist. The image connected to this moment, to the broken woman standing before me, and something inside me shifted. "I called them, Lena," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "After I left your apartment. I knew I couldn't let him hurt anyone else. I couldn't live with it anymore." Her body shuddered with a sob she seemed to be holding back with all her might. He had me so trapped. He convinced me that I was nothing without him, that the family would fall apart if we didn't follow his lead. I was a coward, and I will never forgive myself for what I let him do to you, to Mia. She reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope, its edges softened with age. It was not the one I had found. This one was sealed with my father's old wax stamp. "This is the real one," she said, her hands trembling as she held it out to me. "Dad's original will. He gave it to me for safekeeping a month before he died. He was worried about Victor even then. Victor never knew I had it." I took the envelope from her, my fingers brushing against hers. It felt heavy, like a sacred artifact recovered from a ruin. As I took it, her handbag slipped from her shoulder, its contents spilling onto the rug with a soft thud. A wallet, a set of keys, a tube of lipstick, and something else. Something small and blue and heartbreakingly familiar. It was Mia's stuffed bear. the worn, one-eyed bear that had been her constant companion in the hospital, the one that never left her bedside. I stared at it, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. A wave of confusion washed over me. How? Why? Claire quickly bent down and scooped it up, her face flushing with a deep, painful shame. She clutched the bear to her chest. Sometimes I would go to the hospital, she stammered, her gaze fixed on the floor. Late at night when no one was there, I'd just sit in the hallway. I needed to see that she was okay. The admission hit me with the force of a physical blow. The secret visits, the silent vigils. Behind all the fear, the complicity, the terrible betrayal, there was this quiet, hidden act of love. I stood there in the silent manner, holding the key to my future in one hand, the image of that little blue bear seared into my mind. I had won. Justice had fallen, swift and absolute. But there was no triumph, no elation, only the hollow, aching cost of it all. The victory felt like a scar. I looked at my sister, my betrayer, my secret protector. The questions swirled, vast and unanswerable. I had the truth. I had the will. But after all this, after this chasm of pain and deceit, could I ever truly forgive her? And what on earth would I tell my daughter about the family that had torn itself apart while she fought for her life? The weeks that followed Victor's arrest were a blur of legal proceedings and quiet, steady healing. With the video of the forgery, Sophie's recording, and Claire's tearful testimony about the years of abuse and financial control, the case against him was airtight. The real will my father had entrusted to Claire invalidated the fraudulent one completely. Victor was convicted on all counts, his carefully constructed empire of lies and intimidation crumbling into dust behind the walls of a state prison. The money he had stolen was recovered from his offshore accounts and returned to me. Justice, in the cold, methodical language of the law, had been served. My other family members, stripped of their powerful, charismatic leader, scattered like dust in the wind. They were lost in their own shame, and I was content to leave them there. The bonds of blood, stretched thin by greed and cowardice, had finally snapped. There were no more tense family dinners, no more whispered judgments. There was only silence, and in that silence, Mia and I began to heal. Today, for the first time, we came home. We drove down the long, winding road to Lakeside Manor, not as visitors or ghosts, but as its rightful owners. The late autumn sun was warm, filtering through the trees and dappling the ground with gold. The house, which had once felt like a tomb of secrets and a stage for my humiliation, now looked peaceful, welcoming. I had spent the last week having it aired out and cleaned, purging the last lingering traces of Victor's cologne and the stale air of deceit. Mia, her cheeks full and rosy again, her laughter echoing in the high-ceilinged rooms, ran ahead of me into the living room. Her steps, once so fragile, were now sure and strong. She was chasing a sunbeam on the floor, her joy so pure and absolute it felt like a physical warmth in the center of my chest. This was it. This was the victory that mattered more than any court ruling or prison sentence. I walked over to the grand stone fireplace. In my hands, I held the small, worn, blue stuffed bear. The bear that had been a silent witness to my lowest point in the front seat of my car, and the secret talisman of my sister's regret. I placed it gently on the center of the heavy oak mantelpiece. It looked small and insignificant in the vast room, but to me, it was a monument. It was a reminder of what I had fought for, and a promise to never let my guard down again. As I stood there, watching Mia, Claire's visit to my apartment after Victor's arrest replayed in my mind, the raw, broken apology, the confession of years of fear and manipulation, and then her final hesitant offer to help rebuild what they had destroyed. I thought of the bruise on her wrist, a secret she had never meant for me to see. A few days ago, she had come to see me again. We sat on the porch overlooking the lake, the water calm and glassy. She didn't ask for forgiveness, not this time. She simply laid out a plan, a trust set up in Mia's name, funded by her own share of the family assets she had inherited before Victor took control. It was a quiet, tangible act of penance. "I can't undo what I let happen, Lena," she had said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "My silence helped him hurt you, and I will carry that for the rest of my life, but I can spend my life trying to make it right, if you'll let me. I didn't give her the absolution she was looking for. The wounds were still too deep, the scar tissue too tender. Forgiveness felt like a language I no longer spoke. I don't know, Claire, I told her honestly, and the space between us was filled with the weight of that uncertainty. Maybe. One day. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a door slammed shut either. It was just the truth. Watching Mia now, giggling as she tried to catch dust motes dancing in the sunbeam, I finally understood. I used to think justice was a loud, explosive thing, a courtroom drama, a satisfying revenge, watching an enemy's world burn to the ground. But I was wrong. True justice isn't just about punishment. It's about reclaiming your peace. It's the quiet moments that win. It's the sound of your child's laughter in a home you fought to get back. It's the warmth of the sun on your face after a long, cold night. They tried to erase me. They took my money, my legacy, and nearly my spirit. But I'm still here. My daughter is here. And we are home. Did this story resonate with you? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please like this video if you believe in the power of fighting back, and subscribe for more tales of justice and triumph. And if you're ready for another story of betrayal and revenge, check out our playlist right here. Thanks for listening.